Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. Welcome to the New York Public Library. Please silence your cell phones. Thanks for coming out to help launch the new novel by renowned writer and translator from Spanish, Polish, and Ukrainian, Jennifer Croft, The Extinction of Irena Ray, which is being published today by Bloomsbury. She'll be joined in conversation by novelist Danielle Saldaña París. My name is Salvatore Scibona, the Sue Ann and John Weinberg Director of the Dorothy and Louis B. Cullman Center for Scholars and Writers here at the library. You are in it right now. As some of you know, the Cullman Center selects 15 fellows a year for a 9-month term. Fellows receive an office in the center, access to our collections, and a stipend so they can focus exclusively on their work during their fellowships. The fellows are some of the best and most promising academics, independent scholars, poets, playwrights, journalists, dramatists, artists, and fiction writers at work today. They come here from around the country and the world to use the unparalleled collections housed at this library to write the books of tomorrow. The Cullman Center was founded in 1999. We are currently hosting our 25th annual class of fellows. This series of conversations presents their work. Jennifer and Danielle will talk together for about 35 to 40 minutes, then they'll move on to your questions. If you'd like to pose a question, please write it on the index card on your seat. Staff members will walk along the outside aisles to collect your questions in about 30 minutes. This event is being live streamed on YouTube. If you're joining us virtually, please share your questions either in the chat or by emailing cullmancenter@nypl.org. cullmancenter@nypl.org. Among a drumbeat of starred pre-publication reviews, Booklist has called The Extinction of Irena Ray delightfully wry, and Library Journal a metatextual feast. The publisher's weekly review ends simply, "This is a blast." Copies of The Extinction of Irena Ray are for sale in the hall, and Jennifer will sign them. I forgot to ask you. She will. Good. Danielle Saldaña París is the author of 3 novels, Among Strange Victims, Ramifications, and The Dance and the Wildfire, and a collection of personal essays, Planes Flying Over a Monster. His work has been translated into several languages, and he's been included in Bogota 39, a list of the best Latin American writers under 40. He's been awarded the Eccles Center and Hay Festival Writers Award in the UK, and his latest novel was a finalist for the Herald Prize in 2021. He was a fellow at the Cullman Center last year. Jennifer Croft is a recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and won the William Saroyan International Prize for writing for her memoir Homesick, and the International Booker Prize for her translation from Polish of Nobel laureate Olga Tokarczuk's Flights. Jennifer Croft has received an award in literature from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. She's also the translator of Tokarczuk's mammoth work, The Books of Jacob, which Jennifer worked on during her Cullman Center Fellowship in 2018-2019. She lives in Tulsa and Los Angeles. Please welcome Jennifer Croft and Danielle Saldaña París.
Hi, hello, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Salvatore and Lauren and Paul at the Cullman Center. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be with Jennifer Croft talking about her most recent novel, The Extinction of Irena Ray. I have too many questions, perhaps. So I'm just going to get started. Maybe I will summarize the plot just briefly for those of you who haven't read the novel, which I guess will be many of you. In The Extinction of Irena Ray, 8 translators gather in a house in Białowieża. Is that the right pronunciation? In Poland, near the Belarusian border, to translate into 8 different languages the new novel of the world-renowned Irena Ray. But shortly after they arrive, the author goes missing. Throughout the novel, the translators will look for Irena Ray while simultaneously working on the translation of her latest novel, Grey Eminence. That's just how the plot is set and where we start as readers. I don't want to give away too much of the ending or anything, so I'm going to leave it at that, and maybe we'll go into more detail as we discuss it. So first of all, we encounter a book within a book. The novel we are reading, we are told, is written by one of the characters, the Argentine Emilia, who has been translating Irena Ray's work into Spanish for 10 years or so. But the book that we are reading, this fictional book within the novel, has been translated from Polish into English by another one of the characters called Alexis, who has been working on Irena Ray's English translations for the same period, more or less 10 years. And this very original start has kind of like a Russian doll structure, which reminded me a lot of Don Quixote, of course. As you know, Cervantes introduces a fictional author, historian Cide Hemete Benegeli, who would have written the novel, the Don Quixote, in Arabic, thus creating a metafictional play that involves translation as a key aspect of fiction. In this Cervantine twist, Jennifer Croft takes this metafictional game or aspect even further, introducing the figure of an unreliable translator, which is something very original. We are used to unreliable narrators, but not translators. And here there is a play between the author, the fictional author of this novel, and the fictional translator of the book, who appears once in a while in the footnotes, sometimes even casting doubt on the narrator, or making the narrator even more unreliable than it already is. And we could almost say, or it seems that it's a book written by the protagonist and then translated by the antagonist, which creates a tension on its own. So Jennifer, I want to start by asking you, how did you come up with this crazy structure of a novel?
Well, okay, first I'll just say I'm so happy to be back here at the library, and I'm really grateful that you all invited me back. Thank you for the beautiful introduction, both of you. The structure, so I wanted to dramatize some of the contemporary issues facing translators, practicing translators today, rather than writing an academic book, because the audience I wanted to reach was a bit wider. And I thought of this idea of having these two characters who kind of hate each other. I wanted the main character not to be the English language translator, because that was another issue that I really wanted to examine, the power dynamics of the different languages into which these texts are being translated, and the frequent arrogance of English language translators. These two characters represent kind of the stereotypical poles of approaches to translation. So the faithful translator essentially had to be the narrator, so that's the Spanish language translator, and then the unfaithful translator, who is more of a writer herself and who is, openly talking about taking more of a license in her work in order to appeal to, again, a wider readership. She disagrees with Emilia's version of what happened, what supposedly really happened to these translators. And I felt that having her appear constantly in the footnotes and maybe even insinuating that she had changed the text was just another step in dramatizing the ultimate power of translation. I mean, one of the main arguments that I like to make when talking about translation, which is so obvious to translators, is that, the translator is the person who writes every single word of the book that you read when you read a translation. And I think it really can't be emphasized enough, and I don't think enough readers are aware of that when they're reading, of that kind of fundamental significance of the collaboration. And again, the translator has the last word. So I wanted them to be constantly confronted by that, not only in the plot, but also in the structure of the book.
You said a couple of words that I want to go back to, especially collaboration, and we'll go into that in a minute. But first, I was simultaneously reading, when I was reading your book, I was also reading Cristina Rivera Garza's The Restless Dead, which is an essay I love, and I had read it in Spanish, which is the original language, and then I was reading Robin Meyer's translation of it. And there was a quote that popped out, and I felt very related to your novel. I'm just going to read it quickly. Talking about the second language, Cristina Rivera Garza writes, "Second language is questioning everything, what is original and primal and natural, by the sheer fact of its existence. If the mother tongue achieves an effect of intimacy through familiarity, the second language produces intimacy by way of hyper-vigilance." And I love that idea of hyper-vigilance, the hyper-vigilance of the second language, because I think that's something very present in the novel, and in a way, it's something that seeps out of the text and into the world that you are describing. There's a sense of paranoia almost, where every character is looking for meaning in the natural world as well, and there's a hypervigilance of everything, and a distrust of the world they are inhabiting that has to do with translation, but it also applies just to the way they move around the world, and the fact that the author goes missing early on in the book. So I guess my question would be, what's like the idea of the author going missing and the emptiness it creates, and that how do you see the relationship between this absence and the constant search for meaning that the authors, or the translators in this case, have to go through?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious about your experience as a translator as well, but there are a number of reasons why I needed the author. I needed to get rid of my author right away. So, yeah, for one thing, this is taking place in a really special landscape. It's the last remaining primeval forest in Europe, and I wanted to write about that place, but it also lends itself to a plot in which people who are normally very well behaved suddenly go fully feral. And that could only happen, of course, in her absence. But I also, I feel as a translator that I'm always on this mission of kind of seeking an essence, a mysterious thing that can't really be articulated. I am looking for something that I can capture and reconstitute in my language. And that has to do also with like my projection of who the author is. And I want to feel like I know that person as a person. And I want to feel like I'm inhabiting, is a very frequent verb that translators use. I want to feel like I'm inhabiting her brain, which is such a creepy and horrifying thing to say when you think about it. And I also wanted to explore that kind of creepiness and just the extent to which, the other is always a projection. And in particular, the author that we're translating is always, the product of our own needs and desires. In this case, she's a very maternal figure for a lot of the characters. She's a very charismatic person whom they worship, at least at the beginning of the book. And I also, like I said, I wanted to explore the dynamics between them. So with her kind of at their center, they were never going to really interact with each other in meaningful ways. So, yeah, there were a lot of reasons why I had to get rid of her. She's just gone.
And what it creates is also a sense of, not only the author is missing, but also every sense of authority, and authority linked to authorship. And so for a moment, there's a sense of very funny anarchy and chaos among them, where they are trying to come up with new rules in the absence of an authority figure. And then there's another character that is very important to the plot and to the boundaries they encounter in this absence of authority, and that would be the forest itself. The forest becomes very early on a central character in the novel. You mentioned just now that it's the last primeval forest in Europe, and there's also a great insistence on mushrooms and the place of fungi in this forest, and as a metaphor for turning dead things into life and processing what we don't need anymore. But mushrooms are also used in the novel to make ink, for example, to poison people. It's just like an object that moves around through the novel, and it's placed in different moments. So I want you to tell us a little bit about that, about the place of this forest in particular, and how were you thinking about mushrooms in this plot?
Yeah, I think that's the perfect connection to make with fungal anarchy, because I definitely did want to call into question a lot of these terms, like original. Like, what does it mean that it's an original forest? What does it mean that it's an original text? Kind of, in a way, it doesn't mean anything. And thinking about the way that fungi sort of connect the different entities in the forest, there's no like central command of a fungus. There are just these hyphae. There's this mycelial system that conveys information and chemicals, and that was really interesting to me as a metaphor for translation. I wanted it to be, something that would make us rethink how we view the necessity of translators and their kind of dirty work in the literary ecosystem. And then I also wanted them interacting with real fungi. I mean, one of the things that's so special about this forest that I particularly love when I'm there is just the density that I've never experienced anywhere else of creatures. Like, it is the last remaining habitat of certain kinds of animals, plants, fungi, and that just makes it feel like such an extraordinarily powerful space. And it's really staggering to think that, the whole continent was like that. And now it's been reduced to this very small area that, in the year in which this novel is set, was also under threat because the Polish government began logging, even in the national park of Białowieża Forest, which is on the border between Poland and Belarus. So, yeah, does that answer?
There's just to give you an example of the way the forest becomes a major character and how this metaphor of fungi plays out in the book. There's a moment where one of the characters declares, that's what's anti-environment, the idea of authority. So there's a whole play about like what it means to care for the environment and how that is related to with like getting away with the idea of authority, just kind of getting rid of authority and letting the forest be itself in this fungal anarchy that you mentioned. And another thing that was very interesting in reading your book is the presence of images and how you really use many different kinds of text. So sometimes it can be an email within the plot, but then there's a whole chapter that's just images with captions, like Instagram posts that one of the characters is posting while looking for the author and for a bigger meaning in life, I guess. And so I wanted to ask you, I know that you did this before with your memoir in Homesick, where you also used images and captions, or sort of captions, poetic captions, as a narrative device. And I wanted to ask you, where does this come from?
I mean, I think it's the kind of basic answer is why not? Why would there be boundaries between these different forms? Because that's certainly not a representation in any way of our lived experience. We're constantly interacting with images, obviously. And if I were able to bring in sound, music, which, maybe a future project I'll be able to do that. But what I can do for now is a little bit of photography. And in this case, the purposes were a bit simpler than in the case of my first project, which was really about photography. It was useful to kind of make time pass more quickly, and also just to give people a different sense of what it's like to be in that village and in that forest. And it was important to me to also address social media, again, not only in the plot, but also kind of formally, because that does play such an important role in celebrity culture and art culture, for better, or mostly for worse. So yeah, I think it just kind of serves those functions. But I think there's just no reason not to include image. Like, why? Yeah, why not?
And did you create did you take the photographs yourself?
Yeah. It's so fun, and it also really helps me think about what I'm writing, and it causes me to cut things that would be redundant with the addition of the photos, which then causes me to reevaluate sort of where the plot is heading. And again, not quite as much as in my first book, but I find it really useful to bring in other forms.
Oh, that's interesting that you use it also to
Yeah,
edit
it's a great
in
editing.
a way, as an editing tool. And I don't know, I had the feeling when I was reading that this was really and secretly an Argentinian novel, maybe because I have reading biases. But I think I could, if I were a literary critic, which I'm glad I'm not, but if I were, I would be able to make the case that this is really an Argentine novel. In the same way that Ricardo Piglia claimed Witold Gombrowicz to be an Argentinian author when he really wrote in Polish. And I think you fit a little bit in that strange space that moves between Argentinian literature, French literature a little bit. There's like I could feel the way you use genre literature and some of the elements of the detective novel, but applied to a highbrow kind of world with this celebrity author, made me think of some French like contemporary novels as well. And so I want to know what's that place of difference, that place of exceptionality that you occupy, or you feel you occupy in American literature, if you do, and if you think it has to do with your work as a translator, and or with your experiences living abroad and your life.
I mean, the highest compliment that I could ever receive is to be compared with an Argentine novelist, so thank you so much. And of course, Witold Gombrowicz is an important touchstone for this project, and although he did always write in Polish, almost always, he wrote all of his books in Polish, he also lived in Argentina for 23 years. And there's certainly, influences, Argentine influences on his work. And I love his novels from the period when he was living there, like Pornographia was a big inspiration, too, for this book. So, yeah, I think this also has to do with something that I mentioned at the outset about challenging anglophone arrogance, or the assumption that what we think of as style is kind of a universally accepted or structure. Like, what is a successful structure for a narrative? That's actually, there isn't really an answer for that, but if you go to an MFA program in the US, there definitely is an answer. I mean, there could be like many answers within the answer, but that's something that is really important to me to kind of ask people to rethink, and I'm certainly not the only person who has that project, but I'm teaching more now, and I'm always working on that with my students. So just to bring in other influences, and that is a lot of what I read too as a translator, as you said, and I have lived in Argentina, I have lived in Poland, but yeah, I think, and that has been, you know, part of my role as a translator is to advocate for other forms, and that means, you know, when I'm trying to pitch something to a publisher who says like, oh, this is too slow, or whatever, which is always what they say, among other things, among other reasons why they reject my attempts. But yeah, and then also to sell it to readers, and to just help people kind of open up to these other approaches to storytelling or to language, which I think is that's just a great thing to do. I mean, it is very, very freeing and important to me.
In the novel, you seem to refer to a scandal that took place in the publishing industry between 2016 and 2021, in which an insider deployed phishing techniques and was like hacking different people in the industry, in the publishing business. And this person was eventually caught and processed for fraud, I think, in the States, which is also that something happens to one of the characters in your novel. So what was it that caught your attention? I was obsessed with this case as well for many years, or when it came out and it was everywhere in the news. I couldn't stop reading about it, and I think there's something very hypnotic about this character and this like Italian guy who worked for an agency, or as an agent, or for Simon & Schuster, I don't know, but he worked in the UK and was just fishing for manuscripts for no reason at all. He wasn't selling them or anything. So there's some of this craziness of the celebrity culture and just like having access to novels before anyone else. That sounds a little demented, but fits very well with the world that you created here. And so I wanted to know how you got there to this case, and what was your experience reading about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I love the adjective demented for this entire project, but I mean, I think probably you did you ever get emails from this guy, or you must have? No,
I only have like poetry books that nobody wants to read. It's like no, nobody would fish me. I only receive manuscripts from obscure, Colombian poets. But anyway.
Well, I mean, I did receive emails from this person because he wanted the books of Jacob, which is the poster that you see over there in the project that Salvatore mentioned that I was working on when I was at the Cullman Center. And it was just such a fascinating, we all almost fell for it, meaning Olga almost fell for it. Olga's agent almost fell for it. I almost fell for it. It was really amazing, like thinking again about, metamorphoses and shape-shifting with the forest and the translations. This guy was really good. I mean, I don't know how he did everything that he did, but he managed to perfectly impersonate like my very particular Polish in letters to Olga, or the way that I talked to the agent. And he was able to write, emails somehow in Polish that sounded like they were from Olga. I mean, they sounded just different enough that I checked. I mean, at some point we also like heard about what was happening and were more careful, or were hyper-vigilant. But, and the email address was always just like one letter off from the real email. But it is such a mesmerizing, I hope you write that novel. It's such a mesmerizing.
I mean, you already did. It's amazing.
No,
It's
this is like a very tiny.
it's not the center of the plot, but it's definitely something that adds to the environment of strangeness in the book. And anyway, it's a fascinating story. I could just ask you about this incident for another half an hour, but I'm gonna move on to one last question before we open to the Q&A. I feel that the figure of the novelist, the author, who is also a translator, is much more common in other traditions. Maybe I'm wrong. I think it's much more common, at least in Latin America, which is the territory I know the best, but also in French literature, since at least Baudelaire translating Poe. I'm sorry, but I also have the feeling that it's something that's been changing recently in Anglophone literary world. Of course, with people like Lydia Davis, but also more recently Irena and other translators who are authors themselves. And I want to know if you agree with me, if you feel a change in the in the value we assign to translation and the idea of an author being a translator and vice versa.
I do agree with you that there have been a lot of positive shifts in the last few years in terms of how people see and recognize translation. And I also agree that translators are being allowed or permitted to be authors. I can't think of too many examples of people going in the other direction. I have been making the joke with increasing frequency that everyone should be required to translate a book before they publish their own book. But like the more I say it, the less it's a joke. Like, I think wouldn't that be so helpful and healthy if you kind of did that apprenticeship with someone else and you put in that work on behalf of someone else, but also on behalf of yourself, obviously. And it would, I think it would just enrich everything that we talk about in American literature so much if people did that. But I think that remains like a very remote possibility that also has to do with so many factors in terms of foreign language acquisition in the US. But of course, there are also, so many people who learn other languages at home. And I think that also is being prioritized a lot more in literary translation itself, which has, until about now, been a pretty white field in which people like me, went to another country, learned another language, brought it home, and then, did these translations. But it's no longer homogenous in that way. So I think a lot of great things are happening right now, and I'm really excited about that. And I'm sure that there is going to be a rise. I hadn't really thought about it before you brought it up, but I love the idea that there might be a rise of the author-translator figure. I just think that would be the best possible development.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, can we maybe move on to the interesting questions if we have a Q&A from the audience? I don't know if we have any. Yeah. Great. Okay, there's a few. So first, what is the environment you feel you have most fully inhabited? Ooh, that's a good question. It's kind of abstract.
Yeah, it's very mysterious. I'm not sure. I mean, what occurs to me is like although I love this forest and I've been to this forest and I love being outside in nature, I have really loved living in urban environments. So maybe Buenos Aires is the environment that I've inhabited the most fully, or certainly have been the most aware of trying to inhabit fully, as fully as possible, I guess.
Yeah. Going back to my idea of why this is actually an Argentine novel, I was thinking about Cesar Aira and his literary congress. Is that what it's called in English? I think it is. But also the fact that Aira himself is a very prolific, or was a very prolific translator for many years, who rendered crazy books like Dino Buzzati's El Desierto de los Tártaros, which I don't know what it's called in English, but also things like Stephen King and bestsellers, very unlikely bestsellers that Aira did in Spanish. And there's some of that just like kind of like proliferation of interests and authors and traditions in your book as well, through translation, and translation as a means of digesting, which is why the idea of fungi comes very handy, digesting and processing all of these eclectic materials and turning them into literature. So that's like one of my arguments. And now that you mentioned Buenos Aires, I wanted to go back and just say something about Aira, because it was not completely gratuitous why I was bringing this up. And the next question we have here is, did you always know which languages would be represented by the translators in the novel, or did that change as you wrote?
Yeah, that's a great question. No, I didn't always know. There were a few that I did know. I mean, I was trying to capture an internationally renowned and very charismatic celebrity at a very particular point in her career, when the quantity of translators would still be manageable enough for this to be even remotely plausible, that they would all be kind of locked in her home in her absence in this village. Like, it couldn't have been 50 people. And so that also meant essentially restricting the translators to European languages just for verisimilitude's sake. At least that's been my experience of how, translation of Central European authors begins. It begins with a lot of the neighboring countries. So there's a character who translates into Serbian, there's a character who translates into Slovenian and Ukrainian, German, of course, being a neighbor, French being a very frequent site of exchange, of cultural exchange with Poland. And yeah, I mean, really also it puts those decisions put my two kind of main characters, the protagonist and the antagonist, in this other situation together, even though they hate each other, or at least the narrator hates the translator of this book. Emmy hates Alexis because they're both from the Americas. So yeah, they're coming from further away. They're coming with a different experience of a newer world, and I liked that idea of kind of forcing them to be in this other bubble. There's also a Swedish translator, which I introduced largely because I wanted to be able to speculate about the Nobel Prize over the course of the novel, because, of course, like that's something that happens also to European writers at a certain point in their careers. They just constantly are asked, like, about do they think they're going to win the Nobel? When do they think they're going to win the Nobel? Etc.
And this is a personal follow-up to the question. Do you think, I mean, I'm spacing out completely on my question now, but I'm just going to read one of the other questions because it's going to come back to me eventually. I'm sorry. I was focusing on what she was saying. Are any of the translator characters you, or are there aspects of you in all or any of the translator characters? The autobiographical question we all are familiar with.
Well, actually, I was only asked this, the first time I was asked this question was earlier today, and I had to think about it, and I decided that I identified with the most, quote, normal, end quote, character, or the characters that I would want to be friends with, who are Serbian and French, Petra and Chloe, who are kind of like grounding forces in the very wild plot of the novel. Those are the people I would want to have over for dinner, or whatever. And then, but I'm so amused and fascinated by Alexis. I think she's just an absolute delight in her ridiculous, incessant insistence on kind of being the interloper in this story. And she's a little bit based on, if anyone has seen Schitt's Creek, a wonderful television show, she's a little bit based on that Alexis, but like a slightly more evil version of that Alexis. But if you ever saw the song A Little Bit Alexis, you'll know exactly what I mean. She's just wonderful in her way. But I don't think I don't know. I mean, who knows?
Oh, I love knowing that. It's a great piece of information. I'm gonna reread it with this
Now
new
you
approach.
will
with
forget
this-
about the
this angle.
Argentine novelist possibility. I should never have said that.
No, but my follow-up question came back to me, and it has to do with collaboration. We often think of translators as a kind of like translation as a lonely thing to do. It's just same as writing. And it was striking to see how these people behave in community and how crazy it gets. And I wanted to know if you've ever worked in collaboration like that, or being surrounded by other translators, or in any kind of similar setting.
I mean, so another part of the inspiration for this book is because I get to translate Olga Tokarczuk. I've had the great pleasure of getting to meet some of her other translators at various events that have been organized by her or the Polish government or whatever. They are in no way similar to these translators. They're very, very lovely, generous, wonderful people. But I mean, we never sat down and translated a book together, but that is something that has kind of happened. It doesn't happen often, obviously, but I was really intrigued by that idea that everyone would be kind of digesting the same text at the same time, but then converting it into something completely different. It seems like a unique setting to me, and so I wanted to explore it. But I haven't had that exact experience. But I always think of translation. I mean, translation is necessarily collaboration in a way that, so is writing. But I turn to translation as opposed to writing when I feel like I'm isolated or I feel like I'm stuck. I want to turn to someone else for help or inspiration or input. So I always think of it as that.
Yeah, at some point when I was translating Valeria Luiselli's Lost Children archive, and there was kind of something like that. There was a situation, it was not physical. We were not at the same time in some magical forest in somewhere in the world, but there was a document. There was like a Google Docs where we all exchanged information, and it had, at some point it became a conversation on everything. Just like we started talking about the books that Valeria was referring to, but also about things we were reading at the same time. And it was just a group chat for translators working with Valeria Luiselli at the time. And yeah, ever since I had that experience, I've always felt that you can always call another translator and ask for a very specific language question. And this question has a little bit to do with that. And it says, this book is written as an English translation of a Polish book. Did you conceive of the Polish behind the English? Did it inflect your way of writing? Alexis's translation of Emmy?
Not really is the simplest answer, because I felt like starting to think about all the different languages that would be involved, Spanish and Polish and English, would begin. I mean, this is, as you can imagine, even if you have not seen a word of the book yet, it's a little bit of a complicated conceit already. And so if I really bogged down the English with a lot of, strange vocabulary and strange syntax, strange to English, I felt like it would become a little bit too arduous a journey for a reader to take with me. There were occasionally moments where I would think would this even be possible? And then I would establish that it would be, and then I would move on. But I definitely was not writing the book in Polish as I was going. I made this terrible mistake of writing my first book in both Spanish and English, and I will never, ever make that mistake again. It was an absolutely torturous process to write the same book twice, because obviously it wasn't the same book, etc. But yes, it was only written in English.
And somebody actually asked if you would write something in Polish at some point, or if you would be tempted to write literature in Polish.
No.
That's a very clear answer. Are you translating anything new?
I just translated a really wonderful, very ambitious experimental novel by one of my favorite authors. The author of my favorite book that I've ever translated, Federico Falco, who's an Argentine novelist and short story writer. It's called The Plains, and I believe it's coming out in November. We just finished the edits of that, so I haven't started a new project since then, but like I say, that just happened.
Oh, I love that novel. It's
Yeah.
so good. It's perfect for heartbreak. It's like the right novel to read during a breakup or something. Highly
Definitely.
recommended. Anyway, I think we're coming to an end. But please buy the book, and Jennifer will be signing copies out there, I believe, and there will be occasion to keep talking. Thank you all.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thanks. Thank you.